Disclaimer: I am a law student. Any legal information provided is not legal advice. For that, please hire an attorney. Hi, let's begin with a hypothetical. Let's say you have a couple looking to buy a home together. Let's also say that these people are both non-binary. Let's say that eventually they find a home they're interested in, so they reach out to the seller. But let's say what they don't know is that the seller actually has a deep-seated bias against non-binary people, because she follows YouTubers who regularly make fun of them and say they're not real trans people. But let's say the seller is also not going to voice her bias out of fear of being reported to her boss. So what she does instead is agree to negotiate a price for the house, even though she knows that the house is actually in violation of the local zoning ordinance. She negotiates a price with the couple based on some criteria: square footing, location, amenities, etc. The couple trusts the seller and assumes these criteria to be accurate and reflective of what the house is actually worth. But the seller knows the whole time that if the city council wanted to, they could tear down the house at any time, and it was therefore worth nothing. Question: by using those criteria for negotiating, even though the seller knew the house was actually worth nothing, did she act dishonestly? Hey everyone, it's been a moment, or God, it feels like it's been forever. But yeah, so a little bit of background. Today I was going to be talking, and today I will be talking about the video that Rose of Dawn put out about Contrapoints and her recent video, Cringe. The background that's necessary for this, because we'll get to my criticisms very soon here, but what's important to recognize is that what I was originally hoping to have is a conversation or a debate. That's what I was looking to do. And so I do want to point out before we go any further that earlier this week, I believe this was this past Monday or Tuesday, I put out this tweet saying the following: "Hey, Rose of Dawn, I'm going to be covering your video on Contra this Saturday at 5 p.m. on my stream. I'm letting you know so that if you want, you can come on and talk to me directly so I don't misrepresent anything you say. Hope to hear from you." I did not end up hearing anything from her in response. So, to be, just to follow up and cross my T's and dot my I's, to make sure that I was just double checking, I sent out a follow-up tweet later. "Hey, Rose of Dawn, I noticed you haven't responded to me yet. I'm sure you're just busy. Please let me know if you want to come on my stream Saturday at 5 p.m. EST before the end of the day tomorrow. Hope to hear from you." I did not hear from her. Sad to say. But, the reason I wanted her on here was because I wanted to make sure that all of my when I make my criticisms, that she would have a fair opportunity to be able to refute them on the spot. I guess she didn't want to do that. So, hey, I tried my best. Let's go on. Normally, I don't talk so much about my hypotheticals explicitly, but I do want to explain sort of why I used that one at the beginning, because it was a little different from what I normally do. The thing I want to sort of tease out about this hypothetical, and I want to keep in everyone's mind for the rest of this conversation, is that in this hypothetical, the buyers and sellers had a negotiation over what the house was worth based on several different criteria. But the seller provided no credible evidence for why the buyer should trust that criteria to be accurate. That's because no matter how much square footage the house had, where it was located, what amenities it had, no matter any of these things, the seller cannot prove that the house is worth more than zero. Unfortunately here, you had buyers who were just a little too trusting. Now, over the course of this, I'm going to be making 3 different arguments in response to Rose's video. The first is that Rose cherry picks the arguments from Natalie's video that she responds to. Secondly, that when Rose does respond to Natalie's arguments, that she uses completely arbitrary frameworks. And third, that even abiding by those arbitrary frameworks, Rose's arguments are still internally inconsistent and unsubstantiated by any credible evidence. So, let's go ahead and begin. At 3 minutes and 38 seconds into her video, Rose said the following. In her 1 hour and 23 minute video, Contra talks at length about cringe from a seemingly neutral standpoint. But let's be clear, those 83 minutes of fabulous costumes and academic language are an excuse to do what she accuses myself, Blair, Calvin, and others of doing. Attacking trans people we don't like for our own personal gain. Due to the extensive length of Contra's video, I won't be addressing every point she raised, nor will I focus on ridiculous skits that will make even Doug Walker blush. So Rose, if you're watching, if you happen to watch this later, I have to ask, are you familiar with the cherry picking fallacy? If not, I'll go ahead and introduce you. Also known as ignoring inconvenient data, suppressed evidence, fallacy of incomplete evidence, argument by selective observation, argument by half-truth, card stacking, fallacy of exclusion, ignoring the counter-evidence, one-sided assessment, slanting, and one-sidedness. This is when only select evidence is presented in order to persuade the audience to accept a position, and evidence that would go against that position is withheld. The stronger the withheld evidence, the more fallacious the argument. Now, Rose, what were the reasons, again, that you ignored these arguments that you chose to leave out? That the video was too long? That her skits were too ridiculous for you to handle? It's only an hour and 23 minute video. For you to address all the arguments someone makes, does the video have to be 30 minutes, 10 minutes, 5? I have to ask, what are the hard limits on what you're able to cognitively process? And on the second argument, tell me, if I dress up, like let's say hypothetically, I dress up in some ridiculous costume and I tell you that 2 + 2 is 4, does the fact that I dressed ridiculously make me any more wrong? Or make me wrong at all? Because that's the kind of logic you're implying when you choose to not respond to them on their basis. The fact of the matter is, the reason I think you didn't respond to the arguments that you chose to leave out is because you can't respond to them. I think you watched the video and you thought, oh shit, I think she's right. And I think that the only way you figured you could address her arguments was to dismiss them on a categorical basis. So let's go ahead and talk about the arguments that you did make then. At 9 minutes and 15 seconds into your video, you said the following. A cope can be broken down into 5 steps, as seen in this slide. 1. Try to ward off even discussing the issue in the first place. Secondly, deny the issue exists, downplay its significance or scope, find ways to explain it away as nothing out of the ordinary. 3. Try to reverse the issue back onto the person who raises it. This is a you problem. 4. Accept the issue exists, but then try to point out some other causal factor which minimalizes and normalizes the issue. And 5. When all else fails, resort to the complex. I'm sorry, I shouldn't do your accent, but whatever. And claim the issue is so irreducibly complex that we'll never understand it. Now, Rose, I have to ask, if you ever watch this, again, this is hard because I really wanted you here for this, but I gotta ask, where'd you get this framework from? Could you provide a citation? You didn't in your video. Do you know if it's backed by any peer review? Do you know if it's backed by any scientific literature? Do you know if it comes from a study or an academic publication? Do you know if the person who wrote it has any professional qualifications? Or even, for that matter, do you have any professional qualifications? Do you have a PhD in psychology? Do you have a master's? Do you have any formal qualifications to come to this conclusion or to be able to use this framework? Any at all? Because here's the thing, Rose. I had my Discord do some digging on where you got this model from. And they actually found something very interesting. they seem to be of the impression that this definition comes from a delisted YouTube video called Scarface Viewed from the Left by a YouTuber called Academic Agent, who you actually pinned to the top of your comment section in your video. So first off, if this isn't true, if you deny this, right, I don't know how you would respond to these accusations, but if you were to deny it, I would have to ask, if someone were to find evidence that this is where this came from, would you still stand by the use of this model? And if you just kind of owned up that this is where it came from, I have to ask, do you honestly think that's a credible academic source? I think the person has the word, I get that the person has the word academic in his name, but let's be clear, because I looked at his channel, I just glanced at it. This is also someone who's made such videos, some classics such as Liberalism versus Reality, Why I'm Against Antitrust Laws, The Problem with Unions, The Language Games of the Left, Inside the Mind of a Leftist, and the Ultimate Red Pill books. Do you really think that's a credible source? Rose, you know what the definition of an argument is? Let's talk about that. An argument, at its most basic, includes the following: an opinion plus reasoning. To look at this in terms of a syllogistic analysis, you could say that it's the application of a major premise to the minor premise to come to a conclusion. The reason this is relevant is because the fact of the matter is, I don't have to care about your opinion if you don't give me any evidence for it. If you don't tell me why I should believe you, to me, your opinion is worth nothing. And here, you do the exact same thing that the seller in the opening hypothetical did, where you use a completely arbitrary framework without providing any evidence this correlates to what we're actually talking about. And just like the seller, no matter how much you argue the merits of these arbitrary categories, you cannot make the house worth more than 0. Period. If you don't tell me why this has any objective explanatory basis, the rest of the conversation is meaningless. Let's talk about another example where you do this. At 5 minutes and 45 seconds into your video, you say the following: Contrapoints is someone who is a textbook definition of a gender radical. For those who are familiar with this phrase, it can be summed up in the 5 following points. A gender radical is someone who believes 1. There are many genders. 2. Biological sex is a construct. 3. Smash the binary. Heavy quotes. 4. Don't assume someone's gender. And 5. All of this is accompanied by left-wing politics. Now, Contra easily fits into each of these definitions. Of course, if she doesn't, then I open her to openly distance herself from any of these points, although she's no doubt aware of the consequences from her own fan base. Rose, I have to ask, where does Natalie say that biological sex is a construct? Where does Natalie say, smash the binary? Where does Natalie say to not assume someone's gender? Because the thing is, I thought you said that she easily fits into each of these categories. I assume if she easily fits so much, then it shouldn't be hard for you to produce evidence for her saying these things, right? Like, it should be very, very simple. In your video, the only evidence that you provided to these claims was a tweet from Natalie saying the following. Quote, I feel like I'm pushing the limits of cis toleration and understanding as is being so forward about the feminine penis aspect. But it seems like a lot of trans people want me to push it even further to hairy tops not on hormones can be women too, which yes they can. So your evidence, to be clear, I want to talk about this. Your only evidence is where Natalie says something that is completely backed by the modern majority scientific community. That's what you're saying. You do understand that what she said is literally the consensus of modern science, right? There's literally nothing wrong with this. And to say otherwise would to be an actual science denier. Hold on, I want to talk about this. I've said this before in previous videos, but here is an incomplete list of the reputable scientific and social organizations which recognize the difference between sex and gender. 1. The American Psychological Association, the American Medical Association, the American Psychoanalytic Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American College of Osteopathic Pediatricians, the United Nations, and the United Kingdom's National Health Service. Additionally, here's a quote from an article from Medical News Today on the modern understandings of sex and gender. Gender can refer to the role of a male or female in society, known as a gender role, or as an individual's concept of themselves or gender identity. Sometimes a person's genetically assigned sex does not line up with their gender identity. These individuals might refer to themselves as transgender, non-binary, or gender non-conforming. Literally nothing that Natalie said is inconsistent with any of this. And if you want to call her a gender radical for saying that, then I suppose that just means that gender radicals are people who agree with science? And if that's the case, then I suppose that makes me one as well. I would certainly rather be that than be a science denier like you. Actually, I kind of want to ask a different question on that point. Where do you get this definition of a gender radical? Could you provide a citation? Does it come from any academic publication or institution? Because the fact of the matter is, when you call someone a gender radical, this seems much less like an objective descriptive term and more like a catch-all attempt to attempt to dismiss the opinions of those you disagree with, but who you otherwise cannot argue with on the merits of their claims. Because you fundamentally hold anti-science positions, you can only respond by trying to use posturing that makes your opponents look unreasonable without actually engaging with them. And the thing about this that's just the most astounding, the most astonishing, is that even abiding by these completely arbitrary frameworks, your arguments are still internally inconsistent and unsubstantiated by credible evidence. At 7 minutes and 50 seconds into your video, you say the following. Quote, Contra, on the other hand, avoids criticism of gender radical doctrine. The few times she's made comments questioning it have resulted in a harsh backlash forcing her to step down. For example, her critique of the needs to ask for pronouns at the end of August 2019 ended with her leaving Twitter, after she was accused of prejudice against non-binary people. Contra has regularly been attacked by her own audience for airing a view that isn't quite kosher, and always issues an apology against the hate mobs rallying against her. So, what's the alternative if criticism is verbatim? Well, she needs to cope. Rose, have you heard of the contradictory premises fallacy? If not, it's totally cool. I get it. I understand. Not everyone knows everything. And neither do I, but, I did the research on this. I'll go ahead and explain it. The contradictory premises fallacy is very simple. According to the Carson-Newman University, the contradictory premises fallacy, also known as logical paradox, is where someone establishes a premise in such a way that it contradicts another earlier premise. And that's exactly what you did here. By arguing that the reason Natalie is coping is because she needs to avoid criticism of gender radical doctrine, that directly contradicts with your earlier claim that she easily fits all the definitions of one. And you just cannot have it both ways. This is literally the perfect example of someone trying to have their cake and eat it too. And not only that, but this is the most astounding thing ever. This is the most astounding thing ever. All right? At the end of your video, at 23 minutes in, you say the following. As to the final cope, when all else fails, resort to the complex and claim the issue is so irreducibly complex that we'll never understand it. Let's leave this as a placeholder. Even though you cherry pick what arguments of Natalie's to respond to, and even though you rely on unsubstantiated and uncredible models that fit the narrative you want, you still aren't able to satisfy all the criteria you set out for yourself. At least the seller in the opening hypothetical was able to successfully get the couple to believe that she was using the right categories for negotiation, but you couldn't even do that right. Not only can you not prove that the house is worth more than zero, you didn't even try. And that's because the fact of the matter is, you know that if you tried to respond to this, then you could not possibly get this. You could not possibly meet this category. Because literally the entirety of Natalie's video is doing the exact opposite of this. It's not saying it's so complex that it cannot be understood. It is a dissertation on trying to understand exactly what is going on and exactly why you and Blair and Calvin and others make the content that you do. So, Rose, I do have to ask the age-old question. Are you stupid? Or are you just lying? Because at this point, I really can't tell the difference. Well, I guess I won't know, since you didn't accept my invitation to come on here and respond to me directly. I really would have liked that. I really would have liked to talk to you directly. Don't say I didn't give you the opportunity to do so. But hey, if you ever want to talk, then hit me up. I'm on Insta and Twitter, and you can email me. Peace. How's that, fam? Oh, hey, 50 viewers. How's it going? Mic drop. Yeah. All right. That was a good video. That'll be pretty good later. So here's what we're going to be doing next. All right. I'm going to be reaching out to someone. I'm going to be reaching out to someone really quick. What we are planning on doing next is to have a discussion with one of my friends who actually studies trans history and like LGBT history. And she wanted to talk to me about some of the discrimination that trans people face. And later on, either before or after that, depending on her availability, I want to talk about some recent developments that people are probably aware of already. So just give me a moment. And let's get that going. All right. Need to go to my profile. All right. I haven't gotten her. Oh, wait. Yep. All right, cool. Then Jody, hey, if you're listening to me, go ahead and hop into the waiting room in my Discord. We'll get you on. Let me read some comments really quick while I do this. I feel really bad because I do not read my comments as much, and I apologize for that. But like usually, like I'm doing a lot of like sort of lecture content or lecture style. Ice cream, great. 53 viewers, yeah, pretty chill. Awesome job as you. Thank you. I really appreciate that, Jenny. I appreciate the comments. I appreciate the compliments as we were going through the video. Yeah, that sounds good. Also, hey Vadim, how are you going? How are you doing? Okay, so hey, we're about to bring on Jody, and yeah, let's go ahead and bring her on. Dang it, come on. Hello, Jody.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. How are you doing?
I had to quickly mute the stream, but yeah, I'm doing great. How are you?
Doing all right. So, all right, now you messaged me a little bit, and I'll just be asking a lot of questions. I'll be asking from the perspective of someone who doesn't know anything. So if I ask some questions that seem kind of basic or out of the ordinary, then just know that I'm trying to just cover the bases for all the viewers. Is that cool?
Yeah, that's great. I just wanted to ask real quick, am I coming through audio clear?
Yeah, you're coming through just fine.
Okay, great. Just want to make sure.
Yeah, and if there are any issues, then I'm sure that Riley's whole about. Yeah, it's true. Actually, I just live in a shack Everything that you see behind me is completely fake. But yeah, anyway. So Jody, could you go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit, or at least as much as you're comfortable with?
Hey, so obviously my name is Jody. I'm sorry for butchering the pronunciation of my name, but so I am a undergraduate student studying history.
Mm-hmm.
I take a particular interest in trans history specifically and broader queer history. And unfortunately, the school does not have a lot of classes on it. So a lot of it is like my independent research.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so one of the main things I did as a result of this research is compile a document of a lot of very translated resources, not specifically history, but mostly with discrimination, healthcare, um, bathrooms, obviously, because that seems to be the most contentious thing.
Right.
It
No,
seems
I
like, at
definitely get
least in
that.
the public discourse.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's my main thing, and something I'm very passionate about. And kind of like Riley, I am going to be doing something legal related, kind of a paralegal type job, and then I hope to go out to school for a graduate degree.
Yeah, that'd be
I
awesome.
think my,
I mean, hey, there's always room for more people, especially LGBT and trans people in the legal community. You know, it's definitely, I see it as one of the best ways to be able to sort of push the glacier on that is like social activism, right? There's a lot that can be done in the legal community and in the legal profession. But yeah, that's awesome. So you wanted to come and talk to me about trans discrimination. So can you give me like a brief, like a small primer on what it is you want to talk about?
so I've had a little bit of a small twist on it.
Okay.
Some people that might be involved in Discord more might know that I'm a little bit more new to kind of the social media presence
Mm-hmm.
and Twitter in general.
Sure.
So a lot of people I were just introduced to recently were people like Rose of Dawn, Blair White. Well, I mean, I know Blair White for a while, and
Sure.
Mars, which Riley debated a few weeks back.
Right.
Um, and so my kind of when I'm watching these videos, and more like watching, these people's videos just on their own and just, them giving their own like lecture on their channels. Um, One thing I kind of have an issue with is their kind of unwillingness to talk about the issues trans people face in general. And
Okay.
I think it causes harm, maybe not directly, but I think maybe indirectly as well. Because
Mm-hmm.
when, because I feel like the kind of message you're saying to people is that, hey, trans people are pretty much fine now, and like the top issues we face now is other trans people, or something to that effect.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
and I just wanted to kind of like, make sure people know that trans discrimination is still a very prominent thing. There's lots of violence still against the community,
Yeah.
especially, and it kind of roots back to just, I mean, multiple things. It'd be like I would have to get like a 2 hour lecture on like why these things still exist. But
All right.
I think it bothers me that um, they don't want, they don't really seem to want to go into these issues. Kind of focusing more on these kind of these like pop culture
Mm-hmm.
type issues like Jessica and Eve, which I mean it's important to talk about too, but
Right.
that's one person compared to the millions of trans people around the world that are still
Yeah.
facing issues.
No, and I mean, like,
And
yeah. Or sorry, go on. If you want to keep talking,
oh
I was
no, you can go ahead. That's basically the gist of what I was kind of wanting to talk about.
okay, but yeah, I can definitely relate to that, right? Like, I think in an ideal world, there is a proper way and there's a proper space for covering someone like Jessica Yaniv, right? Like, this is sort of getting into the gray area where it's like this is something within the trans community and it does warrant talking about, right? But I mean, when you go as far as to make essentially like your entire platform about talking and just shitting on one person, and then a lot of your criticisms go beyond just them being a bad person and goes to the validity of their gender identity based on the more like the morality of their actions, right? Like it gets into a really messy and a really bad place really fast, right? And so that's sort of the issue I take on with that. But also, no, I think that you do raise a really important perspective in that, like, ultimately, in the grand scheme of things, like Jessica and even similar people are really not that important as far as like problems that are facing the trans community. And I'm really interested in sort of talking to you and learning more about like the problems that we have faced historically, what we're still facing today, and if you have any, some recommendations on how to be able to resolve those issues. That's sort of where
Oh
I'm
yeah,
at. So
definitely. And
yeah.
um, was there a specific question? I'm sorry, or it's
No,
just
no,
like
you're all
you
good.
want
You're
me
all
to
good.
just go on?
It wasn't. That was just sort of me introduce, like, sort of talking about my perspective on this. So let me ask you then, sort of begin. Like, can you give sort of like a historical primer, like how we got to today and problems that we as a community have faced, sort of over history?
Oh yeah, so um, I would argue that trans people have existed forever, and I don't think that's something that you can really disagree on, you know.
Okay.
But I would argue that the terminology to describe trans people hasn't really existed until the 1900s.
Mm.
So a lot of trans people before then, um, didn't have the terminology to describe their experience. There was no such thing as like gender dysphoria in like medicine, really.
Right. Like it wasn't.
Uh,
Well, I mean, like it may have existed, but it wasn't something coined by any sort of medical or scientific community.
oh
If it
yeah,
existed during the time.
I think the earliest we've had even like of transvestite or transsexual was maybe in the 1910s, maybe,
Really.
or 1920s. I can't be precisely sure. There's a lot like conflicting like opinions on this,
Mm.
but that's kind of when we kind of started to see like the more medicalization of trans people.
Sure.
That's kind of a weird outlier to the general population. So
Yeah. So can I
um,
ask you like why you think that is? Like is it just a matter of there not being a lot of trans people existing in the world proportional to the rest of society? Or
well, I think
is it
it's
like
the
more
proportion of
or is it like more discrimination or like more or not discrimination, but like are there other like societal factors which may have influenced the fact that we have not been as visible over the course of history?
well, I mean, I think it's definitely the proportion of people who have described themselves as trans. But again, like even like 100, 200 years ago, that kind of terminology didn't really exist for people. And even like some drag queens, I mean, some trans people started out as drag queens because there was no like they didn't know that being a trans could be a thing.
Right.
So that's like the best they could do to like cope with their situation, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But so the medicalization of trans people in like surgeries and hormones and things like that is that it places a kind of a stigma on trans people that I think carries on today,
Okay.
and it's that there's something kind of inherently wrong with us that needs to be fixed, and that's
Sure.
something that a lot of trans academics have been talking about for a while. But on the flip side, though, it has provided some benefits because it gives kind of a justification for being trans, so to say.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, like, I understand this. Like, I understand the merits of the arguments, right? Like, it's a way to be able to, quote unquote, prove the validity of your identity, right? And there's something like deeply appealing about that, right? Like, there's something deeply appealing about the idea that if someone disagrees with you, well, then you can facts and logic your way into sort of owning them, right? And I mean, I
oh
make
yeah,
similar arguments, right?
and I've
Go on.
yeah, and I've made that argument to the people I've talked to first just individually, is that I will kind of start out with the medical side of it just because it's easier to bring people over.
Right. Yeah.
It's I kind of compared to kind of what Foch does with anarchism. He kind of starts out with like market socialism to bring people over.
Interesting.
It doesn't seem like too much of a radical
Mm.
change because I'm getting people into like very like deep kind of more gender theory is a very hard thing to do. But most people think, and not because they're like the worst people in the world, but because um it seems weird to them, if you know what I mean. Like anybody
Oh
who's
yeah,
kind of like
I totally get what you're saying. I mean, like to the person who's unaware, like being trans is like one of the weirdest things ever. It's like, what? You were born as one thing and now you're another? Holy fucking shit. That's fucking crazy, right?
yeah,
Uh,
it
like I
it
get it.
yeah, if it kind of freaks people out. Um Especially if they hear about trans people for the very first time, and I think only still like 27%, I think, of people actually know a trans person personally still.
Oh wow. I mean
So that's a
like
pretty low number.
that's more than
Um,
well, I mean like that's I mean it's like a decent amount. The thing with me, right? I've talked about this before, like I've talked about my family, right? Who before I came out, um and this is sort of something I'm seeing change more over the time, but like when I came out to them, their only frame of reference, like the only trans person that they were actually aware of that they could name off the top of their head was like Caitlyn Jenner, right? And otherwise, like that was the only image that they had in their head. And mind you, Caitlyn Jenner is fine, and I'm sure she's living her best life, right? But it's not great when like the poster child of trans people that your family's frame of reference has to go off of is someone who goes on to a national interview and talks about how the hardest thing about being a woman is picking what to wear in the morning, right? It's not a great look. It's not a great look because that definitely does not represent me in the slightest, and it also like feeds fuel to the fire that like, oh, trans women are just people who like are walking talking caricatures of like a misogynized form of femininity, right?
Oh
Yeah, so I mean like I understand, so I definitely appreciate like creating more space and opportunity for trans people to be seen in a public eye and to be able to get, and to, I guess, to effectively be seen as reasonable, right? Like for me, if I'm talking about my own personal politics and whatever, like I would fundamentally, like we can talk about like labels a whole lot, but fundamentally I'm a political pragmatist, and I see like the battle of politics as sort of trying to determine or convince the public on what positions and what beliefs are reasonable, right? And so, you know, I appreciate that more people who are trans are sort of being seen in the public eye, because it makes being trans seem like something which is much more reasonable, in the same way that nowadays being gay is largely in mainstream audiences seen as being entirely reasonable. Oh, you're gay? Well, cool, whatever, it's just part of you, right? And even though I'm not sure if we're quite there yet, I think that we are slowly getting there on our front.
Well, I think that in comparison to gay rights movements, which I mean connect a lot to trans rights as well. I mean, they're kind of interconnected in kind of a intersectional way. I guess that's where kind of intersectionality comes from, as we all face as a community very similar issues. And while we might diverge on certain issues, it still benefits us to work together.
Yeah. And I get that.
The striking difference between, you know, gay rights and trans rights, though, is in terms of our bodies. I think trans people are a little more medicalized than gay people, at least today. I know back then gay people faced the same issue with AIDS.
Sure.
For sure, but people thought that like it could like the gay people were gonna give like everybody else AIDS or something, and to kind of provoke that like fear. So that's definitely an issue in the gay community too, especially like during the 80s and 90s with AIDS, the AIDS epidemic. But we definitely face that issue of medicalization where in order to be seen as a legitimate trans person, we have to undergo something medical.
Right. Or even just, I mean, like there's sort of two layers to this, right? Or maybe even more, but two is what just comes to my mind at first, right? When you medicalize something, it does carry the connotation that like, oh, you have a condition, something is wrong with you, right? And therefore, since something is wrong with you, it can be cured. Usually when I think about this, I mean, like, whenever I think about this idea that like, oh, it's wrong to be trans, I always sort of analogize like to the struggles that people who are gay face when they were first being, you know, seen in the public eye, right? Because there are a lot of parallels, at least on that front, like, oh, you're gay, well, there must be something wrong with you that we can correct with therapy and conversion therapy and all that, sending you off to the camp and whatnot. And clearly we know, looking back on history, and there's so much there is so much evidence to this effect nowadays. Like, we have research that's able to verify that like it does not work, and it just ends up harming people more than it does any sort of help, right? And even if, you know, we want to talk about like the validity of trans people and like what, like at the end of the day, there is probably a lot more medicalization with trans people nowadays than with people who are otherwise some other form of LGBT. I really don't care as much about the why people are trans, personally, because people don't really care so much about why people are gay or bi or lesbian, right? People are the way that they are. And I think that we as a society have sort of moved on from trying to explain why. Who cares why? It's who we are. But with trans people, we have this fixation, at least at this point in time, on trying to explain why people are the way that they are. And that's how we get sort of into the weeds with the medicalization of it. And especially with, oh, well, is it something that can be fixed if it's a problem?
Oh yeah, and one of the main things that really was concerning me recently is really trans youth in general. I find that's
Oh,
been a big
interesting.
target of like trans youth have been a big target of like conservatives, turfs,
Oh, you mean
of that
like,
nature.
youth that are trans who are trying to get on like hormone blockers or
Well, not
similar
just
things?
that, but in terms of acceptance, I've even heard some argue that even social transition shouldn't be allowed.
Really?
Because because they operate under the theory that if you allow like let's say it's pre-puberty blockers even, like you're like 7 years old or something, and you want to pretend it's like a girl at like school or something, go under a new name and such. Their argument is that if well the turf argument really is that if you let the kids socially transition, then they're not gonna know like what it really means to be like their birth sex, and they won't like want to like go back to it or something.
Based on what?
So it's a whole thing with like if you allow them to socially transition, um, they'll just be trans forever or something.
Oh no, because that's such a terrible thing. Like that's
Yeah.
my immediate first thought is like, oh no,
Well, it's the
there's
same argument puberty blockers they've made as well. So they think if you put a kid on puberty blockers, they just won't ever go back
I
or
mean,
something.
that's fine. The
So
thing is like,
they just don't want people to be trans to begin with, really.
right,
Um,
right, right.
but it concerns me, and especially because trans youth are a pretty vulnerable group. I mean, they're under the purview and the authority of their parents
Right.
mainly. So the parents usually decide like all of the medical related stuff for them.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in my opinion, supporting trans kids, and I think this is implied by the data as well, supporting trans youth leads to way better health outcomes mentally, especially mentally.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I also include this in the big document
Mm-hmm.
I
Right.
created.
Yeah. Also,
Um,
I'll give context for that. So, for people who are watching and who are not aware, Jody made a great research document for like all the things that we're talking about and a ton more. It is in, I believe it's in our research channel in the Discord. So, if people want to join the Discord and take a look at that, then join in the link below and go to that channel and check it out. And also, you can like
it's
see all the other research that we do.
is pinned as well in the
Oh, it
research
is
channels.
pinned.
You don't have to go through and like scroll through the entire chat to find it.
Okay, cool.
It's pinned in there. I remember you pinning it.
Yep.
I'm pretty
Yeah,
sure
I'm
that's
taking a
fine.
look at it. Yep. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
It's an
So,
Evernote document,
yep.
kind of in the style of Foch's or Fauch. I don't even pronounce his name sometimes.
I don't
Kind
think
of in the
he
style of
cares.
that. Yeah. I know Rose Dawn, I think that Voosh or something like that.
Well,
But yeah,
she's Brit. I don't know. They say things crazy over there on Turf Island. Like I don't fucking know what her deal is.
it's
Um,
Americans, not Americans.
America.
Um,
Uh,
America, yeah.
yeah. But
Um,
anyway. So,
but
or sorry, you can go on.
but yeah, it's in the style of that, and I did add a little bit to make it a little bit less blatant, maybe.
Hmm. Okay,
Um,
so let me ask a follow up question. Right. So we've experienced this historical issue of sort of like the medicalized nature of trans identity. So where we're at today, what do you think are some of the primary issues that we face systemically as a community of trans people?
it's really discrimination. I mean, I know that's like a very broad term, but
Sure.
that's really the main thing. I don't think, contrary to what certain trans YouTubers might say, I don't think it's other trans people that are really the issue. Um,
Yeah. I mean,
and I mean, there's obviously bad trans people. I don't want to like say you have like all trans people are like angels or something, and
sure.
we certainly definitely have people in our community that are not good people. I don't think anybody's really denying that either, but
No, and I don't think that they will either. Like the thing is when we're talking about like the bad like these people in the trans community, right? There's always a distinction. Like no one disagrees that they're bad people. It's just where the distinction comes in is whether or not we want them in the community or we can judge whether or not they're in the community to begin with. based on the things that they do, right? And that's kind of ridiculous because I mean, like, that's just the most dangerous slippery slope because you are literally tying identity to morality. You're saying, oh, well, if you are trans and you do all the things right, but you're otherwise a fucking terrible person, well, sucks to suck. I guess you lose your identity. You don't get the pronouns. Sorry, bucko. And it's just like,
Yeah, that's the thing with
wow.
Yaniv as well, which I still gender her correctly because I fundamentally believe that trans people can be awful people,
Yeah,
and that doesn't make them not trans or something.
right.
And so I do that, and I know some people like do not like that really, but I think it's a dangerous precedent to send or establish that if a trans person isn't like necessarily like an upstanding person, that must mean that it's okay not to consider them trans or something.
Right.
I would kind of be really upset if like I did something bad or something, like not incredibly bad, but like I don't know, stole something or like shoplifted or something, and we were like, oh, they can't be trans now, I guess.
Right, right,
Um,
right. No,
but
and I do agree.
and I
Um
think it would go further than that too, to like just trans people I don't like. Like if I
yeah.
don't agree with them, so that must mean you're not trans.
Oh
You don't have
yeah.
to real trans.
No, trust me, I
Um,
completely get that. Like, oh, Blair, I just know about this because the person brought it to my attention. There was a video. It was like a couple months ago where Blair was talking about like smaller trans YouTubers that like didn't like her or criticized her, and she literally used she used the pre-transition photo of one of those people, and I believe she misgendered them like intentionally. And I mean, like, in order to do that, like, it's a very intentional action, right? Because like clearly there are like more up-to-date pictures of this person, right? I think that her name is Janae Rose. And like there were clearly more up-to-date pictures of her, but like Blair literally went out of her way to like go back further into this person's history or pictures or whatever to find like one of the worst pictures of this person, right? Like, it's actually terrible.
I
But
remember,
yeah, go on.
I don't know like the extreme details of this, but I remember with Riley Dennis or something, or someone by that name,
Yeah.
another trans YouTuber, I'm pretty sure.
Mhm.
She I'm pretty sure she like misgendered her for quite a while, and then like Riley came out and was like, yeah, I've been medically transitioning for quite a
Yeah,
while now,
yeah, that's something that
and,
exactly happens. It's a little
and
weird
Blair was
because
forced to apologize over
yeah.
it.
No, I mean, like, that's
With
exactly right. Like, Blair literally, like, teared into this person who really, I mean, it's not like her physical appearance changed, right? Like, she still looked the way that she did, before and after she explained that she was on HRT. But after she explained it, it's like, now Blair's like, oh shit, well, she fits my criteria, my very arbitrary medicalized criteria, even though I've been digging into her for however long and making her feel like shit. Well, it was like the only way for her to be able to save any face, right? But that's exactly right. Like, these people will literally just like misgender people who they don't agree with just by virtue of the fact that they don't agree with them, and they'll try and find like some other reason to like rationalize it away. And it's yeah, so I see a lot of like what you're talking about as very easy to observe.
yeah, definitely. And just to ask you real quick, is it okay if I link the document in the chat?
Yeah, go for it.
It's the YouTube chat, right?
Yeah,
Not
yeah, in
like
YouTube chat.
you don't have like a separate like thing or something like Vosh does.
No, but I am working on it. Stay tuned till the end of the summer.
Great. Great. So it's basically just my name. You'll see like a huge ugly link
Yeah,
posted here.
I mean, like, I'm sure that I'll just like point it
Oh,
out.
I think that was too big. I have to shorten the link using like a URL shortener or something. 1 second.
Oh shit.
Oh my god. I hate long links, but okay.
I get it.
It's just people not in the Discord. My main thing is getting the spread as much as possible because I feel like it's useful for anybody to use.
Yeah.
There. Wait.
I mean, like, you don't have to worry about it if it's something that's causing too much issue right now. We can just direct people to my Discord and they'll find it
Oh
there.
yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure. But
Okay.
yeah, the main reason I want to spread it was because I want anybody to be able to use it.
Mm-hmm.
And,
No, that makes complete sense.
and it doesn't, it's not like it's my property really. Like the studies in there are like my property, but I did make sure to credit myself in it though, because I gotta do a little bit of self promotion.
Hey, listen, you did the work, you earned it, right? You totally got that. That's your thing. You got that. So congrats.
But yeah, it's even 20 years ago and today, it's kind of hard being trans in public. I mean, like you can still lose your job on a whim, for being
Oh
trans
yeah.
because,
No, trust me, I get it.
and then um, almost around 30% of trans people have been harassed by a police officer.
Wow.
in their
I
jobs.
did not know that statistic. Holy crap.
6% were physically assaulted, and then
Holy shit.
25% were denied, or around 25% were denied equal treatment in a doctor's office or hospital. But a little over 1 in 5 by a government agency. Which
This is going to
really
be
the big two things for me is definitely the law enforcement and the doctor's office, because there are things we don't really have a choice.
Can you repeat the doctor's office? That'll be relevant because I'm going to be talking about something later and I'll remember that.
It's about 1 in 4 are harassed or disrespected or denied equal treatment.
1 in 4. All right then. Thank you.
And it's due for multiple reasons too, and it's in the document as well. But it's part of it is because just regular discrimination. People don't want to treat a trans person or something.
Sure.
And the other one is that sometimes the medical guidelines for translated care are not readily available as they should be.
Yeah. None.
So I think even in medical, just not on a broader medical establishment, but just individual practitioners, I don't think it's as readily available as it should be.
So,
which I mean might be just the inevitable result of just trans people being a small number in the population. The trans person they meet in the hospital might be the first trans person they've ever seen.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense.
So, and then,
sorry, go on. I don't want to interrupt you if you're going on.
And then we had the Trump administration, I think yesterday, finalizing stuff.
Yeah. I'm gonna be talking about that after we finish talking here. But yeah,
these are huge issues, and it's kind of interesting how people have please stay silent on it.
Yeah, no, it's utterly amazing. I mean, it's just amazing to me because a lot of these problems exist. Again, I don't want to say too much because I'm going to be talking about this in a little bit, but it's just amazing. It's just amazing to me because a lot of these problems exist, but one of the major barriers that I see to be able to meaningfully affect change is the fact that the average person in America they either don't see or recognize the validity of these issues, even though there's overwhelming evidence to show that they are quite real and have quite real impacts on people's lives. Right? It's so frustrating to me that the problem exists. There's evidence that the problems exist, or it's just blatantly obvious, but just not enough people care.
Oh yeah, definitely. I really would appreciate it for trans YouTubers to have a really big platform to talk about these issues, because for me, I kind of just way to blare my a little bit too, is that it's great and all if you can get people to superficially respect trans people, but it doesn't mean a lot to me if these audiences you're trying to reach out to don't stand up for trans people in these kind of situations.
Yeah.
Because you can say you're fine with trans people and all that, but then let something like this happen without speaking out against it really bothers me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And again, I think it goes back to this idea that people are getting this impression that this stuff doesn't happen anymore and that we're just overreacting or something.
Yeah. So how do you think that we address this? It seems like one of the largest issues, one of the biggest problems that we face as a community is public acceptance and support. I mean, obviously there are a lot of very specific issues.
Oh,
but what I'm hearing is that's one of. Sorry, what?
Oh, 1 second. Somebody in your chat was saying that I was a little bit quiet.
I turned you up. Yeah, I saw that.
Okay, good.
Yeah. I know.
That was a concern of mine coming. I'm kind of a soft speaker, so.
You're all good. I think you're coming out in loud at the beginning, so I turned you down a little bit more normal, and then you quieted out, and so it ended up being super quiet. So don't worry, we're back to normal.
Okay, got it.
But yeah. So what do you think are some of the best ways, in your opinion? You don't have to answer this question if you haven't thought a lot about it. But what do you think are some of the best ways to try and shift public opinion? Because mind you, a lot of the people that we've been talking about earlier are those types of YouTubers, those types of trans people. they would make the argument that the way to sort of win that battle is by trying to distinguish the good trans from the bad trans and trying to make the good trans out to be people who are reasonable and should be supported by the larger community. Do you think what do you think would be the best course or a good course for the community to take to try and get the kind of support that we are looking for?
I mean, I think with all the civil rights movements and just movements in general, I think it's speaking out. I think the more people we have that pay attention to these issues, the more people will kind of come out and support us. And
Yeah.
I think it definitely kind of falls down on ourselves and our allies as well to really speak up. And I would definitely put an emphasis on allies as well, because in a lot of cases, trans people don't have a choice, really.
Yeah.
Because this affects us whether or not we care, you know.
Yeah.
I
I
don't
get that.
think the average person is gonna really care if, like, an average person that hates trans people is really gonna care if you're a real trans person or not. I think they're not gonna like you nonetheless. But it's only people speaking out. And I've seen some good trans people, like, well, not good trans people necessarily, but like just trans people are willing to go out and speak about stuff. Have been very helpful, I think, and having good role models as well, and
Yeah.
showing that we are capable human beings also really helps as well.
Mhm.
I think the big example I can come up with is Danica Rom in Virginia.
Oh yeah. No, she's
She,
someone who I am trying to follow after. So we'll see how that goes over. But yeah, no, I totally agree. Like, she is a wonderful, wonderful example of someone who is openly trans and was able to do like this amazing thing. Which, mind you, maybe a lot of people won't take it to be like this big thing. It's running for a state Congress seat, but also she got elected into state Congress. She was able to get an entire area of a state where she's in to be able to support her candidacy and elect her in. I think it was over like an explicit bigot too, right? Which it makes the victory like all the better. So yeah, I totally agree. Like, and it makes me feel a lot better because nowadays, like, when someone asks like about like mainstream trans people, like other examples that I could talk about, like, she's one of the first people who I'll always cite to, right? Because, like, damn, she's cool. I don't know. I'm really excited. I try to follow her
yeah,
political career.
and I think she got reelected as well.
Yes,
So she's been pretty successful.
good for her.
And I think she's gotten a lot done as well, which is what led to her being reelected.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah,
think she's probably one of the most accepted trans politicians probably in the country.
that probably is true.
But she's showing that, like, despite being trans, she's very capable of accomplishing really good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And about very meaningful changes, which I don't really follow Virginia politics that very often, but I thought those like road issues that she went on a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Like she wanted to fix the highways or something.
Right. No, I totally get that. I
Something
know
that
some people who are in Virginia. One of the people in my Discord, Hobbs, is in Virginia. So I don't know. I have to ask him about it because I actually don't. I don't talk to him as much about Virginia politics, but he probably knows more than I do. Maybe I'll have him on sometime to talk about that. But yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And obviously, I completely agree. I think that one of the best things that we could do is try to increase our public visibility, to advocate for, acceptance and support, especially for people who don't normally fit conventional narratives, right? Like, for me, I'm in this weird spot where technically there's really not that much physiologically different between someone like Blair or Rose and I, right? Like, we're both, like, we're trans people who have gone through like medical transition, right? And we're also
definitely.
white and come from a good degree of privilege, right? I suppose that where we
True.
differ, yeah, and that's just being completely honest. I suppose that where we differ is that I do recognize the things in my life that have made it a lot easier for me. I recognize the things that have gotten me here compared to a lot of other people who haven't had it as like nearly as easy, right? I've talked about Faith before, who is just like me in a lot of ways, right? One of the smartest people I've ever known, but who comes from such a place in the country which is a lot poorer. It's in the South. She doesn't come from a family that has a lot of money to be able to help her, and not a family which holistically accepts her either, right? So whereas, comparatively, like, I have a family which nowadays I know is very accepting of me and is willing to help me with something like my legal education, right? Like, I would not be here if not for their assistance. That's just it's just the reality of it, right? I wouldn't have been able to do nearly all the things that I have been able to do. I understand that it's very hard for people who have all of these things to sometimes recognize the privilege that they have compared to people who don't have them, just by virtue of like the roll of the dice. But I am trying my best. And I hope that for people who are watching, right? Like, this is just me trying to be as straightforward and direct with you, my audience, right? I hope that it's apparent that I am trying to account for the perspectives of people who I don't necessarily share the lived experience of, but who I want to do my best to be able to support. So,
Oh yeah, definitely. I think, for me personally, I think I'm very lucky as well because I don't think without my parents I would be in college. I definitely couldn't afford to do it. I would probably have stopped after my second year. But yeah, it's definitely good to realize just trans people have a diverse range of experiences, and that although we might be fine in terms of just support in general, other trans people do not have that luxury. And that's kind of the people I kind of really want to advocate for, is that the people that aren't as lucky.
Yeah.
And stuff. And especially the youth, because if you're kicked out of your house as an adolescent or teenager, you're just going to be poor, I feel like, for a while at least.
Yeah.
And when you're poor, I think like your main objective is to stay alive, and feed yourself.
No, that's absolutely right. Like when I was
sorry,
go on.
So you're stuck in the same spot.
If I could actually talk on this point for a second, because when I was in Memphis, right, I worked as, again, for people who are unaware, I worked as a program director for a homeless outreach nonprofit before I came to law school, right? That's what I did. I worked with people in poverty day in and day out. And you're absolutely right, right? A turn of phrase that's pretty popular in the line of work that I was in was, God, I'm trying to remember it. It's something to the effect of being poor is one of the most time-consuming jobs that you'll ever have, right? Because when you are poor, when you're living in poverty, you are spending the vast majority of your life just trying to survive, right? You have to be able to account for expenses like rent, because you're probably renting if you're not at like the position where you're able to afford a home or come from a wealthy family. You probably need to afford things like healthcare. You need to be able to afford like all the basic other amenities. You need to be able to get like your internet. You need to be able to afford a phone, or you need to be able to afford like transportation to your job where you make money so that you can do all these things again, right? Like there's so many things that you have to focus on just for getting by day to day, which people with a lot more capital and people who come from a lot more position of privilege, or a lot more positions of privilege, just don't have to worry about, right? Or have to worry about to a much lesser extent, because they have the capital to be able to be like, well, I don't have the same stresses as the people who may otherwise constantly be thinking about when they're getting their next check, when they're getting their next payout, when they're able to afford, their food for the month or whatever it be, right? So a lot of people who I worked with, it's very hard to help them because they spend the vast majority of their time, for example, in Memphis, very technically, if you wanted to, you could get a free hot meal 6 out of 7 days of the week. I don't know why it's not on Monday. There's just no one who's doing it yet. So technically you can have a free meal every single day, or almost every single day. But in order to do that, in order to get those meals, you have to spend so much time walking or trying to get to the places where they have the food. And so what people end up doing is they spend the vast majority of every single day just walking from place to place to place, getting food, getting services, getting what they need. And there's really never any time to rest, because if you rest, you might miss out on when they're serving food, and you might not be able to eat that night, which is not great. And so, yeah, I tend to agree that especially when you have trans people who are kicked out onto the street or who have nothing from very early on, like not only are they living in poverty, but then they have all the additional expenses and troubles that come with being a trans person in society, So I definitely see that. I see that as something being resolved in part way by culture and acceptance of trans people, and also in policy, right? I believe in, radical healthcare reform so that trans people don't have to worry about that. and other people don't have to worry so much about necessary medical procedures or medication or what have you, and other social benefits which would address the problems which we just talked about.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I do think generally with public health care, it'll probably be easier for trans people to access it. But maybe like through the government, we can gain more. Um, Even if it might not be in the private sector, we can gain more discrimination and protections
Mm-hmm.
within like just the public government.
Yeah.
Like I know that like my thought with like the public healthcare option is kind of this relating to trans people. There's a ton of different reasons to support it as well, of course.
Sure.
Is that you know so I think it's more arguable to the general population to argue that hey, the government should not be able to discriminate against particular citizens
Sure.
because the citizens pay taxes into the system and therefore should be treated
Interesting.
like
So you shouldn't
fairly.
discriminate against people based on their income, right? So, for example, like
Yeah,
what currently exists under like Obamacare, or what is left of Obamacare, because
yeah.
like technically you can get help, but you have to be basically making next to nothing. Like the minute that you get like a job at McDonald's, you immediately lose the qualifications to be able to get anything under Obamacare, which is kind of ridiculous, but hey.
Yeah, it's I think with all disability, not disability programs, I mean poverty programs, I think you have to you have like if you work over a certain number of hours, I think you lose those benefits. Or
Mhm.
something to that effect. But with trans people going back to that really, I wish I was more of an expert in public health care, but I think it's more arguable that within the public health care system, the government should not be able to discriminate against citizens.
Oh yeah, no, trust
Um,
me, I completely agree. I'm going to be talking about this in a second, actually, but no, suffice it to say, I agree with you that the government shouldn't be able to discriminate against like who they provide healthcare to. Healthcare is like a basic thing which everyone needs to live. I would go as far to say that it's a human right, and because by virtue of the fact that when you refuse to give it to people, you could actually be like condemning them to death at the worst, right? So yeah, no, I definitely hear you, and I think that the public opinion of that is slowly shifting. We're not there yet, I don't think, but I think that like given how popular Bernie was, that we are definitely on our way to getting there, right? Like the fact that Bernie was as popular as he was on a platform of Medicare for all, the fact that he ran that platform and he got as much support as he did makes me want to believe that we are seeing a much broader recognition of, in society of like the necessity for that kind of a policy. So, yeah.
oh yeah,
I
yeah,
don't know if you,
definitely.
yeah. So I don't know if you want to add anything else. Is there anything else that you want to talk about?
Sure. So, I want to address a few things about because this kind of came up really kind of concerned me when J.K. Rowling did her whole like transphobic manifesto or something.
Yeah,
Um,
that's the
and
thing that
so,
happened.
oh yeah, definitely that kept me up at night a little bit. But um,
Yeah,
just for looking at stuff, just research to like double check what she's saying or whatever. And so my main concern with that really was this idea that, or what they commonly say is like we're not really worried about trans people, is that like other people would take advantage of like these
sure.
trans inclusive laws to hurt women or something, which is what she's basically saying
Mm-hmm.
in like so many words.
Sure.
Is that if we like make trans inclusive laws that allow trans people to use the bathrooms that align with their gender identity,
Right.
that's like some sort of like gateway drug into like a lot worse stuff or something.
Yeah. No, I gotcha.
Or like men pretending to be trans to like hurt women, which I don't think that's really supported by the data at all. And I just want to say that in the research document, I have a whole section on sexual assault in bathrooms,
Mm-hmm.
and I have all the good data that proves that, at least in my view, that these laws do not have any connection to any like rise in like sexual assaults in these type of spaces. Um, so I kind of think that's more of a fear thing, and it kind of seems like people talk about these issues, especially like TERFs, don't really provide any like source for what they're saying. It's usually like a few individual cases.
Oh yeah, exactly. They only
And
ever like vaguely. It's one of two things, right? It's either vaguely gesturing at like the possibility of some terrible thing happening, or they focus on like this one pinpointed example, usually taken out of context and usually entirely misrepresented, as like a way to basically say, oh well, hey, it's possible, it can possibly happen, maybe sorta. So like we need to fucking roll back all the protections because even if there's a slight possibility, then we need to make sure that we fucking hold all of trans people away from bathrooms or away from healthcare or what have you, right? It's such a ridiculous argument. And yeah, like I would be very interested to see your data. I mean, like I've definitely heard that, I remember when we were talking about like especially a couple of years ago when trans bathroom bills were much more popular in the public eye, there was someone who came out and basically said, listen, we actually didn't believe what we were saying, but we knew that public opposition, especially on like more right-wing politics, was actually a place where like if we said this thing, then it would make our politicians more electable, right? And that's really the only reason that they did it, was just to scaremonger and to be able to get like political capital. That's it.
Well, in my state, North Carolina, I think we were the only state that actually successfully passed the bathroom bill.
Mm-hmm.
I think everywhere else it actually failed.
Yeah,
there's an article on this, had like a whole table of like, maybe it's in Wikipedia or something, but some article that like detailed like where these have come up and like if they succeeded or failed or how far they made it into the legal process,
right?
like legislative process.
Yeah, but I mean, like, the thing is, I mean, if we want to talk about like broader, the broader sort of turf points, again, to me, it always bothers me, and this is me thinking out loud, right? But I think about this a lot, right? About just like responding to them on the merits, aside from like, well, I mean, like, first off, I think that the fact that like there's no evidence that there's actually any substantiation to their fears is a really good point, at least on like a larger level, right? Now, on the points where they talk about, these specific people or these specific instances, first, I want to be able to see if they accurately represented what happened or if they're reporting from like a biased source, right? Because usually that's something which is like a big catch-all for a lot of these arguments, right? But then secondly, I mean, I don't know why we can't just punish these people on the merits of the bad things that they did as opposed to like relating it to them being trans. If you're worried about trans sexual predators, just punish them for being sexual predators. You don't have to make it about them being trans.
They have to argue that there's something inherently bad about being trans.
Oh yeah, no, and I get that, but otherwise, I mean, like that's the whole bit, right? Is that like I don't understand, like if you're really genuinely worried. Right now, I'm sort of like I suppose that like in a sense, I'm kind of parroting Natalie's commentary from her cringe video, right? Is that like if these people were legitimately concerned with just like maintaining the well-being of the children, help the children, or like actually catching a sexual predator, then like I don't understand why they can't just like report the fact that this person is a predator without like getting into like the nuances of whether or not A, they are authentically trans, or B, whether or not like the fact that they are a trans person doing these things should somehow impact the policy over like all of trans people, right? Like there are laws against the kind of bad shit that they do, so just punish them on those merits. It's really simple. So yeah, like that's the thing that always sort of gets me hung up, especially like now that I'm in law school, right? Like I literally learned about like rape and sexual harassment and all those things, right? Like they are blind to, well, I mean, like, all right, if we want to be like super specific and like super nuanced, when you get to jury trials, sure, like some people are going to be more negatively impacted by jurors or judges than like other people, but usually this will affect people of minority status more than people who are, say, like cis and straight and white, right? Which would actually cut against trans people. But the point being that like we already have laws for all of these things that people raise issue with. So like if you have a problem with these people, just like report what happens and then punish them according to those laws. It's really simple. But yeah, so no, I definitely hear you, and I definitely like it's hard for me. And it is also hard for me because like J.K. Rowling like almost ruined my childhood with that.
Well, luckily for me, I wasn't a big fan of Harry Potter to begin with.
I was a very big fan. Fortunately, Daniel Radcliffe and the rest of them came out and were like, no, we're cool with trans people. And I was like,
yeah, yes. the power triangle came together to
I
defeat
know.
transphobia.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. It's so
I
great.
think I know Daniel Radcliffe and oh my god, Emma Watson and Rufert or something Rufert or something.
I'm
But the
sorry.
guy
I
that
don't.
played
Yeah.
yeah, the
Yeah.
guy that played Ron.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, and then there was another one that played the like I guess it's a Korean or Chinese character in
Okay.
the movies that also came out against it. There's like a couple others too, but
That is
yeah,
really
a lot of
cool.
the cast has come out against it, and people are pretty mad about it.
Yeah.
Well, at least the transphobes are, but
Well, yeah.
they're arguing that kind of like this Rowling gave you your life and she can destroy it kind of argument. Like how dare you betray Rowling
I
or
know,
something
I
like that.
know. But I mean,
Yeah,
like, it's a pretty good thing for them to do, right? And I think it's definitely like the appropriate PR stunt because I mean, like, she is sort of like the creator of this entire universe, and like for a lot of these people, she's the reason why they're famous when you boil it down to it. So like, it's cool for them to be able to come out and be like, "Hey, listen, obviously this person is like a little bit off her rockers. We do not adopt this whatsoever, and yeah, trans people are cool. Like, we're not gonna like be arbitrarily mad at them or whatever." um the thing that bothers me the most about J.K. Rowling, and I was talking about this the other day with someone, is that like if you read her essay, a lot of it is just like 2015 turf blog like talking points, right? Like you could literally go through and play like turf bingo with like all the different catchphrases that you find
you,
like throughout the
you could
article.
you could
um
create an AI program
Yeah,
for
you
it.
really
Just
could. You could just
all you
like
can
have, yeah,
write.
yeah, exactly. You could just write an AI, and they could have written the exact same essay or something extremely comparable on its own, just like based on like turf algorithm. It's
Basically. But
entirely possible.
my
Um,
main concern is the kind of reach she has.
mhm.
So I feel like compared to her, trans YouTubers and just trans people in general, like don't really have a huge audience, except maybe Contrapoints. Um,
Yeah,
she has a huge audience, and Blair White, but
right.
Blair White isn't going to speak out against that, and
Oh god, no, absolutely
um,
not. I feel like she's probably gonna
yeah,
support it. She'd be
she
like,
already
"Oh yeah,
has,
this is
pretty
fun."
sure.
Are you fucking serious? I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised. I don't know why I said that like as if I was. But the thing about it that was the most interesting to me was that I was talking with someone the other day, essentially about the fact that like it's hard to tell how relevant online politics are. For as much as we want to think that we're on like the cutting edge of politics or political discourse, I guess what I sort of see is sort of like a jet lag in terms of how long it takes for certain discussions in online political spaces to make it into the mainstream. JK is like a great example where it's like she didn't say anything that wasn't already being said in turf talking circles like 5 years ago, but it's only taking until now or very recently for those kinds of talking points to be making it to sort of like a widespread audience, right? And it makes me wonder if we can observe the same things in other areas of politics, right? Like right now we see a very stark rise of fascism and far right populism in a lot of online spaces. And I wonder if that has some explanatory factor, or if that is an explanatory factor for why you see like a rise of far right populism in a lot of modern politics, right? In like mainstream politics. So yeah, that's just something that I wonder. It makes me extremely concerned about the future, but it also does make me at least feel like that we are doing the right thing by sort of engaging in more political discourse, talking about these things, because like, hey, if they're having a ripple effect, then maybe we will too.
Yeah, and the essay she wrote was just so vague as well. It didn't really contain much specifics on like what exactly
Mm-hmm.
she had a problem with, really. I mean,
Yeah, I mean that's
she
the
just
way
kind of
that they
repeated the
are.
talking points, and it was like, well, I think that if we allow trans people in the bathrooms or something, then like it's going to put other people in danger, and it's like
Just like
they don't really
vaguely.
provide any source for that. And my problem with that is that like, maybe deep down she doesn't really hate trans people. Like it's hard to know. You can't know for certain.
Right.
Um, but when you kind of like spread this idea that like trans people are somehow like a gateway to predatory men or something, it makes people feel justified in excluding us.
Yeah.
Because like, let's say like some trans person like tried to use someone's bathroom or something, and like some person like operated the idea of like what J.K. Rowling is saying, that letting this person in there is like going to allow other like will allow predatory men to like enter the space too.
Mm-hmm.
And so I kind of feel like that leads to like people feeling okay like in a real life setting pushing these people out or like committing violence against them, if they feel like by doing so they're protecting people.
Yeah. No, I
Which
100%
really
get
bothers
that.
me.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't matter. I mean, that might not be her intention, but I feel like that's kind of the end result of that kind of rhetoric.
Mm-hmm.
It's ultimately the exclusion and the kind of demonization of trans people.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, like deep down, she might not personally hate trans people, but the kind of rhetoric she uses will it can have a real life impact.
Yeah, there's a distinction between objective and subjective analysis here. Subjectively, we don't know what she's thinking, but for all practical purposes, it doesn't really matter what she personally believes. An objective analysis would tell us that like that's focusing on the effects that what she does has on other people, right? And I agree. Like practically speaking, this can only have negative effects on the trans community. Like it only has negative effect of trying to like posture large portions of the population. I mean, like, fuck, how many people follow her on Twitter? Right? Wasn't it like more 14 million? It's some crazy number, right? And so, like, it's just crazy to me, like, how much of an effect that she can have with just like one essay, like, literally turning entire swaths of the population into like proto GC people or like proto TERFs or whatever you want to say, or just TERFs outright. So, yeah, no, I completely agree with you. I completely understand.
And then there was one more problem I have with the essay, and I'm kind of like, I think I'm done talking about it. I don't think there's really much to say on it. Well, maybe two other things. Using her domestic abuse to kind of like support her positions kind of felt really wrong to me as well.
Yeah.
When I think about like any transphobia I've experienced, I try to use that experience to kind of like tell people, hey, look, you know, we're human beings too, and we still face lots of issues, and we should work in society to fix these issues and make it so that everybody can be safe. I don't go out and like say like, oh, I really hate cis people, you know. I hope that like, yeah, or something like that, you know. I don't like attacking other groups to do it really. Well, not like on a fundamental level. Like, I might say something like, well, cis people really need to speak up, you know, because it would really help the trans community in general. Just, you know, gain more acceptance. But I don't think like I'm gonna like attack cis people's right to like healthcare or something, or to use the bathroom or something.
No, I get that.
To do that. And then there was the that just kind of bothered me. And the third thing was the ROTD study that she referenced. That hasn't proven like multiple times to be flawed, and yeah, she still referenced it.
Well, hey, what can you expect, right?
I know, but it bothers me. But she's like, yeah, I've read so much data, and then she just lied about that. I'm like I don't know. It bothers me. I feel like she read 95% like TERF stuff and like 5% from trans people, and of those 5% of trans people, like 4% were like bootlickers or something.
Yeah. No, I totally get it. Well, hey.
Yeah.
Anyway, I hate to cut you off, but we've been talking for an hour or close to an hour, and I want to sort of cut it off there. So, do you want to give any shout outs, or do you want to say any give any final statements?
So obviously the most important thing to me is the research document I made, just because I want people to spread it. Also in that research document, I did credit myself, and my Twitter is in that document as well. And the reason I say that is on my profile, the research document is the pinned tweet. And that would be really cool if people with larger audiences would retweet that, so people can use it to argue with when they debate transphobes or just anybody.
All right. That's awesome. That's
goal,
actually really, really cool. So yeah, hey, everyone, go check out that research document. It's in my Discord. It's the pinned tweet in the research discussion. And or it's a pinned
the link to my Twitter is in the research document, so it'd be really cool if people retweeted that.
All right, awesome.
Really cool.
Well, hey, Jody, thank you so much for talking. It's been absolutely wonderful, and it's been very educational, so I really appreciate it, all right?
Oh yeah, it's been great. I love talking. It's my first time talking in like a few dozen people. So
Yeah, well, hey, you did
great.
great. And yeah, I'll be sure to re-upload this later as like its own independent video. So, all right, thank you so
Cool.
much.
Thank you so much, Theo.
All right.
I'll talk to you later.
Yep. Bye.
Bye.
That was cool. All right. Let me see. Let me take a quick look at some comments real quick. I just need to take like a small mental break. Only like a couple seconds. I already got up essentially the last thing that I want to talk about. Good chat. Yeah, so Jody is one of my close friends in my Discord. You'll see her in there if you ever want to chat with her. That's actually a really cool thing that we try to do. We try to facilitate conversation, like a lot of decent, like good faith conversation, in that Discord, and I don't know. I feel pretty proud of it. So, yeah. Yeah, I totally get that. All right. That's good tea. That's the tea, sis. All right. So what we're going to be talking about next is something that happened yesterday. And I gotta say, I wasn't expecting it, but I'm also not surprised. And for those of you who aren't aware, first off, what rock are you living under? But for those of you who are not, yesterday I was told, someone who I was hanging out with told me that this happened. Trump administration erases transgender civil rights protection in healthcare. A rule finalized on Friday by the Department of Health and Human Services means that the federal government no longer recognizes gender identity as an avenue for sex discrimination in healthcare. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack here. The thing that's most interesting to me about this, the thing that's most oh yeah, actually, someone commented, I want to point that out, on the anniversary of Pulse. Can we talk for a moment about the fact that Trump literally did this? Trump literally did this in the middle of Pride Month while we're dealing with a pandemic and we're dealing with like riots in the street and protests about systemic racism, while we're dealing with all of this fucking shit, like multiple historic events, and in the middle of Pride Month, on the same day, on the anniversary as Pulse. What goes through Trump's mind? What does he think is the most important thing to do? Let's take away the protections of trans people in healthcare. Like, what can I say but yikes? To quote a much larger YouTuber than I am. But yeah, let's talk about this for a little bit, shall we? So earlier, when I was talking to Jody, we had a conversation about like some of the things that people will experience, some various forms of discrimination that people will experience. And we talked a lot about people's experience in healthcare. I think that it's a common misconception that a lot of people have that, oh, you know, people don't discriminate against LGBT people. That was some odd years ago, right? Or at least that's generally what I hear. For example, my family, and especially my mother, will often say things like when, for example, I'll have conversations with my mother about the fact that like people who are trans, especially trans children, when they come out to their family, will be like completely ostracized from their family and just like kicked out of their homes and onto the street. And my mom wants to look at me and be like, holy shit, Riley, that's absolutely absurd. What kind of family, what kind of mother, what kind of father would ever fucking do that? But the answer is that it happens a lot. It happens way too fucking often. And I've worked with people, again, this is what I did in Memphis. I have worked with people who've been in that exact same position. I lived with someone who effectively was in that position for a bit of time in her life. Of course, she was able to do decently well. And I think that a lot of people don't think that discrimination happens in healthcare. But just to talk about the discussion that we had with Jody a little bit ago, again, for people who were not present, you can go back, or eventually you can rewatch the video that I will upload about that, and you can see the research document. I'll try and pin that in the video that I repost, but you can also see it in my Discord in the research channel in the pinned comments. I think it's like 1 in 4 trans people experience discrimination in healthcare places or by someone operating in the healthcare field, whether it's because of lack of access to information on how to deal with trans people, or whether it's just because of the bigoted beliefs of medical professionals. I want people to let that sink in for a second. All right? 1 in 4 trans people are on average discriminated against by healthcare providers. Before, the only thing that we really had going for us, was the fact that we had some decent protections under the law as a protected class. That's really all that we had to be able to combat this sort of thing. And now we don't. And there's really, I mean, like, I shouldn't have to be in the position where I have to explain to people why this is absolutely terrible. Like, I feel bad for having to make this video or talk about this on stream. But, like, think about this, people. If you put trans people who otherwise, it is medically necessary for them to get the healthcare that they need, whether it is medication or surgeries or what have you, right? Like, I have to go to the doctor every couple months, sometimes even quicker if I have like some issues going on with my body or if I'm otherwise sick, right? Because I have additional things to worry about than the average person because of the fact that I'm trans, right? I have to go to the doctor every single month, or not every single month, like every 2 to 3 months. I have to get tested. I have to get re-prescribed my medication. And then if I get sick, I still have to interact with doctors, right? Like, could you imagine if I got sick and I showed up at the hospital and I was like, hey, doctor, I'm sick. And they're like, well, fuck you. You're a fucking slur or whatever, right? Like, could you imagine if someone did that just because of the fact that I'm trans? They just turn me away, even though I otherwise have insurance, even though I otherwise have everything that I need to be able to get treatment. And they turn me away. And I'm either not able to get tested, or I'm not able to get my medications filled, or I'm not able to get the treatment that I need for whatever it is I'm dealing with. As I said earlier, I maintain the belief that healthcare is a human right. If you are denied healthcare, at worst, you can fucking die. And the sad part about this, like the really, really, really sad part about this, is that this is probably going to end up killing some trans people. Like, almost certainly. Especially people who live in the South or places where otherwise trans acceptance is not very high. I worry about my friends in the South who still have to live there and who aren't able to move because of the cost of moving. I know that people have talked earlier about, oh, well, if you don't like the area, just move to a different one. Except it's not as easy as that. There are tons of costs of moving. Then you also have to make sure that you have a job. Like, you have to make sure that you have a job wherever you're moving. And that's even harder. You ever try getting a job before you move? It's fucking difficult. Especially if you don't come from a position in life where you're very employable, heavy quotations, from early on. So yeah, the thing that's most astounding to me about this, or I shouldn't say most astounding, but something that is very clear to my mind, or something I've definitely taken notice of, is that a lot of people want to try and defend Trump as someone who doesn't actually hate trans people and doesn't actually hate LGBT people. He doesn't actually try to take away their rights, is usually what they'll say. He doesn't actually try to do anything which will substantively harm them. Like with this, what evidence do you need beyond this? Like, what more do you need to show that he's just a bigot and that he just hates trans people. And fuck, he's also a racist. For people who haven't seen it, I literally made a video talking about the fact that he recently just called, like, because of the riots and everything relating to, like, the death of George Floyd and like, everyone else recently, that he literally called, like, all the protesters thugs, and he had a tweet of his literally praising violence against them, or, like, approving of violence against them, taken off of Twitter, or not taken off Twitter, but, like, heavily reported to where it was, like, delisted off of Twitter. For people who are watching, I want to just get one thing clear to you. I just want to get, if anything, just one thing clear, because I want to ask you, what more evidence could you possibly ask for that this man is a bigot? Like, what more could you possibly ask for? Like, at this point, is it literally, like, is the threshold for bigotry, like, actually trying to arrest us and put us in concentration camps? Because if this doesn't meet the definition of bigotry, I don't know what does. This is going to be especially important because in November, we're going to be voting. There's going to be an election. And it's going to be a really tough election because his crowd is going to come out swinging, and we cannot take any chances. Please do not vote for him. And please vote for whoever the Democratic nominee is. It will likely be Biden. And I am sorry that that means voting for Biden. But please vote this man out of office. He has harmed me. He has harmed the trans community. He has harmed the black community. He's harmed basically every minority community at this point. If you don't believe that he has met the threshold for bigotry, I don't know what'll do it. And that's the tea, sis. Cheers. God, what is this timeline? We're actually living in the worst timeline. This is the kind of thing that makes you, like, become an alcoholic. I won't, don't worry. But this is the kind of shit that definitely makes you want to. He'll shoot you in the leg, but not in the face. Listen, I'm never defending Biden. I'm never saying that he's a good person. But I don't think that there's any reasonable person that can say that he is better than Trump. That's literally it. Hopefully better tea after November. Yeah. Trump supporters aren't interested in whether or not he's a bigot, and anyone who says otherwise is lying. Yeah, no, I mean, I get it. Right now, mainly who I'm trying to speak to is, like, the reasonable, moderate person, right? Or at least the person who holds himself out to be the reasonable, rational person. Of course, it's still hard to reach those people. It can be very difficult. For me, and this is actually something very interesting, I've learned that my family has actually started watching the stream. It's kind of weird, I'm sure, saying that out loud. But yeah, it's interesting as I'm going forward, knowing that, like, there are people in my life who watch this, and not only that, who watch this and, like, support me. Because, like, let me be candid, like, they do not come from the same political positions I do. And it can be hard to have those conversations, right? Like, I don't want to push my family away from me. I love them. I love my father, my mother, my brothers, and my sister. They mean the world to me. That's why I did so much when I was preparing to come out. That's why I effectively planned for years and years and years, because I didn't want to lose them, like I know a lot of trans people lose their families. I didn't want that to happen. I don't know, Dad or Hayden or whoever, if you're listening, know that I'm not trying to come off as, like, pretentious. I'm really not. I have, like, the lowest opinion of myself out of anyone that I know. And I'm just trying to help. I'm just trying to make the arguments that would reasonably convince you to take certain political action. Because whether we like it or not, it affects me, and it affects a lot of people in really substantive ways. what we just talked about is a way that I literally, as of yesterday, have just been harmed. My rights have been taken away from me by our president. It doesn't really get much more clear than that. So yeah, I'm trying to think. I got through everything reasonably fast today. I didn't expect that. Of course, if Rose had actually come on, I feel like this would have gone over a lot longer, right? Like, I effectively zoomed through all of the points that I was going to be making with her and expecting a bit more dialogue between us. So I think that what I'm going to do, that's 3 videos or 3 videos worth. I feel pretty good with that. So I'm going to cut it there. And I don't know, I might consider streaming a little bit later, like playing some ESO or hanging out with friends, but I'm going to make some dinner right now. And if I stream later, then it'll just be like something casual, all right? Otherwise, I've had a long week, and so no promises, all right? But thank you all for coming out. I really appreciate it, and yeah, have a good night. Peace.